All right, we are live. Hello and happy Wednesday to everyone. Hopefully, you're finding your way to this conversation. If Kevin and Gabby, if you want to go ahead and share the links, you can. But welcome for those of you that might not know me. I'm Ruby Garcia. I'm a leadership consultant, coach, and hypnotist. And I have the pleasure of moderating this conversation today between Kevin and Gabby, and just kind of really sharing more about the work that they're doing. I've gotten to know them over the last couple of months, and it's been just it's been fun and interesting. And one of the first things I said to when I met Gabby, and she said that she was working together with Kevin, I said, "Oh, that's an interesting combination." And so we're going to dive a little more into their story. And I'm not going to say too much about them because I'm going to let them share more about themselves. But if you're listening in, feel free to drop in the chat where you're listening in from. This conversation is all about leveraging your privilege for good, leveraging your power for good. And we're going to be talking about a little more about their personal stories. We're going to talk about owning your personal story and how that can make a difference. We're going to be talking about privilege, allyship, sponsorship, and what that looks like, specifically how Kevin and Gabriella have partnered together and what it looks like for them and the work that they're doing. And then what it means to give back and how we can use, all of us can use our individual power to give back to the community. And so, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Gabby and Kevin to introduce themselves. If you just want to tell us in a snapshot a little more about your personal and professional backgrounds and what has led you to where you are today. And again, feel free if you're joining to let us know where you're joining in from. And Gabby and Kevin.
Sure, I can get started. So, as you mentioned, my name is Gabriela Parra. I am an immigration attorney and also owner here of Layde and Parra. I come from immigrant parents, but my parents are from Mexico. My husband is as well from Mexico, and I was born here in the U.S. I am, in the process of reclaiming my Chicana identity. So I always make it a point to say that because it's a process sometimes for some of us, some of our Latinos. I graduated from the Law School of Medicine and met Kevin actually in my last year of law school. And then both of us got the privilege to work together at a nonprofit at Catholic Charities here in Milwaukee, and been doing immigration work since I graduated law school.
Awesome. And you are 2% of Latina attorneys in the U.S., right, Gabby?
I am very damn proud of it too.
Yeah, awesome, as you should be. And Kevin, tell us a little about yourself too.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I'm Kevin Layde. I am the other half of Layde and Parra. I grew up in the Milwaukee area here in Wisconsin, in kind of a very traditional suburban upbringing, not a lot of diversity in terms of anything really, race, socioeconomic, stuff like that. So I did go to college at UW-Madison, and then from there I had the opportunity to travel a little bit around the world. I was able to pick up Spanish and some other things like that before going in and doing a program where I was able to get to work a lot with some students who were a lot from immigrant backgrounds or certainly very different backgrounds than I grew up with. And that kind of sparked my interest in kind of pursuing this area of law. So when I went to law school, I went to UW-Madison along with Gabby, as she mentioned, worked my way through and kind of fell in love with the clients and the type of work that I'm able to do now. And then, as Gabby mentioned, we started out working together at a nonprofit. So we've kind of known each other for a few years, really, before we decided to make this partnership together. And here we are, I guess, being, as far as I'm aware, the only Caucasian male Latina immigration firm, at least in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah, kind of an unlikely duo, I would say at first, but you both found your way in partnership through your relationship, starting at the college and then proceeding from there. Kevin, I'm curious for you, like, what was because you were in practice a little before you became partners, right? You had already established your practice. what was your motivation for bringing Gabby on into the practice?
Honestly, Gabby's one of those people, Ruby, that as I've gotten to know, like when I started to work with her, I could tell right from the beginning that she and I are like a really strong complement for each other in a professional sense, for sure. I think she has a lot of skills in a lot of areas that are not necessarily the areas that I have the biggest strengths in. And I think that there's some aspect of that going the other way as well. So I think when we were able to have an office next to each other, when we were working at a nonprofit, there would be a lot of time. And I could also tell that, she took this type of work super seriously and was super committed to it, which is something that I, felt the same way about. So I think that just having our office next to each other and being able to talk and be able to work together and collaborate and be able to start to see how we could really support each other as young attorneys, people trying to figure out our careers, trying to work through all the minutia for our clients and all that type of stuff. It was really a natural fit. And obviously we do come from very different backgrounds, but I do think that, I don't know, we share a certain sense of humor. I feel like we have a certain level of family values and stuff like that, which kind of transcends those types of things. And so basically from the minute I was starting my own practice, it was like I felt like there was somebody missing in the office next to mine, basically. So I don't think we made it through even a full year before I tried to come in and pull Gabby away. And I'm very fortunate that she decided to join me.
Yeah, that's awesome. It just goes to show the value of relationships, getting to know someone, seeing their strengths, knowing where, having that awareness of maybe where there's, I don't want to say a weakness necessarily, but like that you're able to complement each other, right? Like where someone might be stronger, you can play off of each other and leverage that, each other's strengths. And we have Maria listening from the Green Bay area. So Maria, thanks for joining us. And if you're listening in, let us know where you're calling in from or listening in from. Gabby, I know for you, you transitioned, there's been quite a transition coming in as a co-owner and now thinking of yourself as an entrepreneur too. Can you tell us a little about what that journey has been like for you?
Sure. So I think as growing up in an immigrant household, I don't think the ambition of, or even this idea of owning a business was engraved in me. And so I think, as I navigated the different places where I was at, there was always this hesitation that I was always just going to remain working either at a nonprofit. Not that it's bad, but just business was not something that I felt comfortable with or that I felt that I was going to succeed in. And so, especially because you hear all these people, right, saying like the first year of, your business, it fails. And so that was a big, big fear in me. And so inside me. And so I think when, the opportunity presented itself, it was very terrifying, to be honest with you, to be like, how am I even going to get clients? How are they going to hire me? When you're working at a nonprofit, I mean, there's just such a huge need that they just come to you. So we had built a reputation by then. We had taken very tough cases. So the community started to know of Kevin and myself. We were ready in doing some of those cases. So it's that intimidation, right? It's that scary thought that you might not succeed in this. And then the imposter syndrome starts coming in. And so all these things, and you're like, you know what? If I don't try it, I'm always going to think about it in the back of my mind that, I could have been really good at it. So because when you're doing your own practice, you have to manage the practice, manage clients, being an attorney, manage the business income, to the business, and then having that tough conversation with our immigrant clients in my community, right? Like, why are you charging me? And so it's like, am I going to be able to have all these tough conversations and be able to show to my clients the value of hiring me? And so eventually I pushed through those, negative thoughts, reminded myself that I had the skills to be able to show in the care, that to be able to show that I am the perfect fit for them to, represent them in their cases. And so when I pushed through all of that, I was like, sure, let's do it. And to be honest with you, like we started as just the law office of Kevin Layde. And when Kevin sat me down and said, we have the name of the firm, and because we were in the transition to get a new name, I don't know why, but we were in this transition. I think it's because when I became an owner, And I was like, what is it? And then it said Layde and Parra. I literally said, are you guys joking right now? Like, let's be real. And then they're like, no, we're dead serious. And it took a minute for me to sink in that this is like serious. Like, he wants me to be his partner in this. And so the journey began, and I had to learn how to be a businesswoman on top of how to practice immigration law, on top of everything else, as well as Kevin. You know, we didn't have the best business experience starting out, but I think now we've really have built from each other and committed to building our firm.
Yeah. And it's, you know, so many times I think I hear this a lot. People have a vision, they have a desire, but they don't know how. And it's the not knowing how that stops people from pursuing their ambitions or their dreams. And what I heard is like what both of you did was, you know, lean into the discomfort, you know, that relationship, that partnership, you know, you balanced each other's strengths, leveraged each other, and learned in the process, right? And so you've been able to grow as one of the most established and well-known and reputable firms in your area, which is, you know, really impressive. And you've been able to make a lot of, you know, more importantly, you've been able to make a huge impact in your community. And I know, Gabby, one of the things that you had shared, and I would love for you to expound on, because I think this is real, is that, you know, being a woman, being Latina, being in your role as a managing partner has not always been the easiest, even from your client's perspective, in terms of how they viewed you. I know you shared, I don't want to give it all away. Why don't you share a little about like how that's looked, maybe some of the things that you've heard said, or how you've been confused as not as the owner, but as, you know, maybe like a paralegal or something like that.
Yeah, so I think it's always, in general, community partners, my clients, even the offices we deal with at a daily basis, in the government offices that we deal with at a daily basis. Like, it's been a struggle for them to understand, like, I am one of the owners of Layde and Parra. Like, my last name is there. Like, usually clients come in and be like, I want to talk to el abogado Kevin Parra, or Layde Parra, or Layde Parra. And I'm just like, it's two last names. I am one of the owners. I mean, there was a situation, and Kevin's, one of Kevin's clients walked past my office and said, oh, you have a secretary here. And Kevin's like, no, it's la abogada Gabriela Parra. So it's like, it's been a struggle when I go to some of these government offices. I have we sometimes had an interpreter that was white and speak Spanish, and she was the interpreter, and they would direct their attention immediately to the interpreter and be like, is this your client? Or if I was standing next to a male Latino who was dressed on a suit, they would directly put their attention to him, like, are you the attorney? And it was just never their first step to at least ask, like, who's the attorney here? It was immediately their attention to another person that wasn't me. So I think it's been a challenge to always have to establish my identity and my influence in this firm. You know, I think Kevin Layde has done a great job in supporting that and always reminding our clients that I am not your, you know, muchachita. You know, male clients have called me different names, and I'm like, I am your attorney. You know, please call me abogada. You can call me Gabby if you want, but do not call me like, you know, chiquitita, bella, and
Yeah.
stuff. And the other thing that's interesting is like I just learned from our staff that our clients refer to me as la buena, pero what was it, Kevin? Like buena, pero cara. And I'm like, Kevin we charge the same thing across the board.
Yeah. Kevin, I'm curious for you, because you know, I'm curious for you, like what on the other side of it, you know, you're hearing Gabby kind of talk about some of these scenarios, and how do you know, view that? What makes you act on that? Because I feel like, you know, me personally, coming from a corporate background, and it's predominantly white, right? Like, I I'm curious from your lens and perspective, what comes across your mind when you hear these scenarios or when you hear Gabby talking about this, and what causes you to step up and say something. Because sometimes that gets shuffled and, like I said, being from corporate, I've seen a lot of times where it's just not addressed, but you are very intentional about stepping in and saying something.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think honestly, for me, Ruby, it's been a learning process. I mean, constantly, I think everything about our work that we do is a learning process. And I think that kind of starting to understand some of these dynamics of like race and the way people are addressed is something that was really not on my radar in any meaningful way when me and Gabby started to work together. It's just a person that I'd sort of known for a while, and I wasn't, I think that I understood Gabby as a professional, but I think it took me some time working with her to really be able to understand some more of kind of like her personal context and how that comes into play. Because I'll be honest with you, at times where clients would think that she'd tell me a story where the client would, or somebody would, an officer would think that she was a receptionist or would think she was an interpreter. My initial reaction was like, oh, haha, isn't that funny? You know what I mean? Like, isn't that so goofy that they made that type of mistake when really you're an attorney and they thought this or that? But I don't think it really fully dawned on me until at some point after probably a few years after we worked together that like, what would that be like if someone did that to me every day? You know what I mean? One time or something like that, it can be, or, whatever, a mistake. But if I think it's the type of thing where it starts to become repeated. I mean, I would have to imagine that gives the feeling of a person that people don't think that you belong there. Or people think that you don't look like the typical person who does this type of work, and the types of ways that would call into effect, I guess like your, maybe some self-worth or like imposter syndrome and stuff like that, like Gabby was saying. And I remember this, Gabby, when we were early on in our career, we went down to Chicago. You were doing one of your first kind of big hearings in court. And the government attorney on the other side was this African-American lady. And Gabby and her had a very contentious hearing where they were going back and forth. And it was like very tense and very fraught at certain points. And I remember we were debriefing, and Gabby won, by the way. Whatever, 8 years
course,
ago.
no surprise.
She did win. And I remember we were debriefing, talking, and I kind of just went down to like support and observe. This is like new stuff for me too. And I remember we were having a conversation afterwards about what happened. And I don't remember sort of how this came up or who said it, but I think the idea was kind of like, that lady was like very battling tooth and nail, maybe more so than some of the other government attorneys. But we're kind of reflecting on like, she's probably had to go through a lot of stuff when she was climbing the ladder to get to the point where he was, where she probably has to be really assertive and really like try to go over the top and be 110% and all the types of stuff that she does. So I think it's just kind of been like an accumulation of experiences, really. And I honestly think that like empathy is something that isn't like inherent or whatever, and you can't like learn it out of a book. You know what I mean? I think it's just sort of like caring about people who have different types of backgrounds and being around them and that type of stuff. And I think slowly it starts to sink in, get through my thick skull after a while. So.
Yeah. And it's interesting that it took, some time to realize it, because I could definitely see how like a one-off conversation is kind of like, ha ha. Mm-hmm. You kind of let it roll off your shoulder, and not that it's funny at all. I'm not saying that, but but how after a while those comments can really wear on you. And it just speaks to the importance of one, representation and all, across different industries and at all levels. But then two, to your point, Kevin, the role that empathy plays a part in, because, you thinking about it and saying, man, if someone was like questioning you, in your role, constantly, it kind of wears on you. Right. And it probably wouldn't feel so good. And would, it would really make you question, like, am I deserving? Do I belong here? Am I in the right place? And Gabby, you have had to kind of overcome some of those limiting beliefs.
Yeah, and I think like I've given,
and structural barriers. I don't want to just say it's limiting beliefs, because there's a lot of structural barriers in the way too.
I think something I want to share is like, I think I always brushed it off because that was just a survival mechanism. Here in Wisconsin, we're navigating predominantly white spaces. So it just gets exhausting, always correcting, always like making that uncomfortable conversation. So I think I learned how to brush it off. But I hit rock bottom when, there was an organization that serves Latinos, is particularly Mexican, citizens. And they still didn't see the value of me and were reducing me to a secretary. And at that point, I was like, I am done giving people grace. Like, it is not fair. Kevin and I both have the same education, build the same in our firm, have the same position, and why am I looked still as the secretary of this firm? Like, my last name is on there, and I think that's when I really established, and I sat, we had a tough conversation with Kevin, and I was like, I think I need to stop this, and I'm not going to give people grace anymore. It sucks because you feel lonely. You don't have that many Latina attorneys to come together and rally each other and support each other in these spaces when we're going through this. So you rely a lot on, white attorneys. And so it's just like, but that's when I really, I made it a point to stop giving that much grace to people and really start educating them, even if it's difficult for me or it's tiring or exhausting.
Yeah. And there's a comment here from Grazia. Thanks for focusing on this important topic that's so relevant for so many women of color. And it is uncomfortable to lean into some of those conversations. And I'm sure from both sides, right? Gabby, from your side saying like, hey, I'm tired of this. And then Kevin, from your side, feeling like, maybe there's a little bit of, what do I do with this, right? Like, how do I support Gabby, as a partner, as a colleague in some of what she's experiencing. And I think I think one of the things that people can, this is where perspective comes in. I think about like, white savior syndrome is, you hear about that frequently. But in this case, it's really been, I think what I've heard from the both of you is that there's been a lot of, learning. And then really this has been about allyship and sponsorship too. And so, kind of turning the conversation in that direction. And Kevin, this is more for you, is like, how it, and I think it's important to say that like privilege comes in a lot of ways, right? Like it could be, I always say that one of the ways that privilege shows up for me is like, one, I can be white passing to some people. And, I speak English is really my first language because I grew up with a American stepdad and Mexican mom. We grew up in a middle to upper class, predominantly white neighborhood. I went to private school, for part of my education. And so when we talk about privilege, it's much bigger, right? I'm a citizen, so there's so many things that we can look at privilege. But what has sponsorship and allyship looked like for both of you, individually, maybe collectively too?
Yeah, I can jump on that one first, I guess. So, I think that your point about sort of this white savior thing is definitely a very valid. It's something that I think that a lot of white people think about when they're trying to navigate these spaces, because I think there's certainly, and this is something I've felt at times too, like I have my own opinions and my beliefs about like the importance of like racial equity in this country, and the fact that we as a country, we have a history of white supremacy kind of built into a lot of aspects of our daily lives and stuff like that. And I feel like I have like I certainly had like a theoretical understanding of those types of things before I started working with Gabby. But I think there is definitely like a real fear of being able to put yourself out there and start to make comments or take strong stands or do things like that, because there's a sense where it's kind of like, is this really my place to be the person who's saying these types of things or these comments? Or, is it just going to be, am I just sort of calling attention to myself and like taking the attention away from like, trying to, people talk about amplifying voices, for example, instead of speaking for other people. So I certainly think those issues are not as complicated or challenging as trying to navigate, for example, American society as a non-white person or whatever, but they definitely are things I think that a lot of folks with my background do get snagged up in. And I think it limits a lot of people who may want to speak out or do things, agency or ability to do that. And I mean, growing up, I sort of do check all the boxes, Ruby, for privilege, right? I'm a straight white man who grew up in an upper class suburb, Christian family, whatever, sort of the majority family or majority group in kind of every demographic. And, I do think it's really important to understand that like white privilege is a real thing. It's like it's not something that's just sort of like a focus group thing or whatever. And I think that like reading some of the stuff like the invisible knapsack or whatever, like, I have things that I carry around with me that other people don't have, and I don't think about them, that allow me easier access to do things where I have to answer less questions, or I have people second guess me less on certain things like that. I mean, I think that's like really the place that you have to start, honestly, to be able to kind of reckon with that. And it's like a little bit uncomfortable for people like me. And it's certainly like there were times where I felt angry when I was thinking about these things when I was younger, trying to grapple with it. Like, I'm not a bad person. Why do I feel like I'm being blamed for stuff that's not my fault, and all this type of stuff? And I really do think that the other piece that has to go hand in hand is really just like practical experience of being around people who are different than you, and like getting to know them as individuals, and getting to, see that, obviously like people aren't that different when you get down to the base level, but the experiences that we have and the lens through which we're viewed in the world is very different. And like, you have to be frank about that. And like, I don't think you can sugarcoat it. I don't think you can try to just sweep it under the rug. So, it's an ongoing process. And I think as Gabby can probably tell you, it's something that I still work on to this day. I mean, this year we've had a lot of conversations about how I feel like I'm like relatively like cool in terms of the mindset I have about stuff. But I think that there are times where I have not been proactive enough in terms of actually using some of this privilege or using some of my voice to be able to reach out and try to like work on these issues. And as I tell my friends and family, maybe you don't always have the same viewpoints as me, or have had the same thoughts about this type of stuff. Like, I feel like it's like stuff like white privilege is like, when you see it as a white person and you really see it and you really open your eyes, you can never close your eyes again.
Yeah. Once you see it, you can't ignore it. Right.
It's like, or you can't be once you stop being in denial about it, I guess, maybe. Right. And then at that point, there is like a responsibility, I feel like. So that's something I continue to, I guess, work on, like what that's going to look like for me, I guess, going forward.
And Kevin, I'm really curious, because I think this is really important, because we hear a lot of times people of color talking about this. So like, from your perspective, and I know you're not speaking for everyone, but from your personal experience, what was it, one thing or a buildup of things, or what opened your eyes to realize, like, I have this privilege? And we automatically, I think there's this assumption of like privilege is bad, right? Like, and so you don't want to feel guilty for having, right? But again, this is all about leveraging the privilege for good. So what was the experience that took you from like reading about it and it being theory to really being something that was like, I feel like it's kind of the revelation between like the mind and the heart almost, in a way, right? Because it's like, oh, you get it. It clicks. Now I recognize it. Now I'm not in denial of it. What was it for you?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be my AmeriCorps experience. When I spent a couple of years in a majority, a school with no white students, essentially, on the south side of Milwaukee, probably 50% African American, 50% sort of like immigrant from different parts of the world. And just like, I just spent the year before that traveling around like Europe and like living in Spain and doing all these things that obviously were like, I mean, the fact that I speak Spanish is a function of my privilege, right? It's like I learned it by being able to like not really work for a year and just study and that type of stuff. So like doing all this stuff and then coming back and like having all these great experiences and then going to spend, these couple of years serving in this school. And I just had this sense that like my life was way more like growing up. My life was way more like the people who were 3,000 miles away that I just been with than the people who live 5 miles away from the house I grew up in. And just like, these kids like are just as smart as the kids that I grew up with. They're just as funny. They're just as good, interested in stuff. But they just had so many obstacles, and you could see how it was like this tiny, it's like there were so few obstacles where I grew up that like 99% of people are going to be successful, right? But like, then it's like, okay, the bus is not going to come and pick up this kid half the time because of problems with transportation. They have to work because they're a single parent household. Mom and dad don't speak English, so they can't fault them about their grades. And it's just like all these things narrow it, where just a tiny percentage of students in those types of environments are able to succeed. And it's like, why, like, why is it set up like this? Right. So I feel like that was really what got that made me start to ask some questions that were initially very uncomfortable for me. And I think it kind of started from there.
Yeah. And I think it's funny because I have a presentation I'm facilitating this afternoon, and it's all around courageous leadership. And that's what I'm hearing you, Kevin, describe as courageous leadership, because it's a lot of looking within and asking the hard questions and leaning into the discomfort, right? Like leaning into that discomfort and sitting with it, and maybe not always liking the answers that you're going to get in a response, but noticing what's there to explore and discover. Um, Gabby, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think I mean Kevin did an excellent job talking about white privilege. I mean, I think for me, one of the big things that I know my privilege in I'm able to access certain spaces as an attorney. And I always have to mention I am an attorney because I always just start the conversation when they're like, "Where do you work?" And it's just like, "Oh, Layde and Parra." And my last name, right, Parra on there, usually on those little name tags, Gabriela Parra. And then they're like, "Well, are you the paralegal there?" And I'm like, "No, I'm the attorney." And then the way they view you just shifts in a second. And so I've come to understand that I do have some privilege as a Latina business owner, attorney. And so I, for one, is always focusing on providing spaces because we have to create these here in Wisconsin. They're not easily accessible. Creating spaces to be able to have these conversations with other Latinas and Latinos, and then being able to be in positions because I get invited to certain spaces because I'm an attorney now, and being able to uplift other Latinos. And that's what my focus is, and using that privilege I have and being able to earn with a lot of hard work and a lot of removing a lot of gatekeepers and pushing through those gatekeepers. And so that's like a big thing that our firm is looking to now. It's like shifting that, like, how do we remove gatekeepers, provide access to other Latinos and other people of color to be able to access some of the spaces we've been privileged to access because of our education.
Yeah, and that's the perfect segue into the next conversation, which is really like where Layde and Parra is going next, right? Because you have a very established reputation. You have clientele, and you're kind of reaching this point. I think both of you personally and as a business, where it's like, what's next, and it's not necessarily all just about business and dollars and number of clients, but now we're looking at like really how else do we what's our legacy, what's the legacy of our organization, what is the legacy for us as individuals. And so I know that both of you have been really focused on where you want your efforts to be seen, and this has required a lot of intentionality and thoughtfulness. And so why don't you either one of you want to share about what's next and what does giving back look like for the both of you?
Sure, I can get started. So at the beginning of this year, we started having a lot of discussions on like the barriers and access for certain Latinos and people of color. Specifically, we started talking about like our clients who come to our office. The number one reason when you ask them, why did you come here? And sometimes we just ask that question just to learn their story, right? Give them that ability. They love sharing their story. I feel a sense of empowerment in helping them share their story. But the number one reason that always was said was because I wanted to make sure that my kids had a better future and access to education, which I did not have in my home country. And that, for me has really stuck. My parents, I mean, for them, the achievement level for me was high school, but for them, that was like, that is success in our family, right? So I want to give you that success. And so after some reflection, some deep conversations with Kevin, we decided that we want to put and invest our resources to give back to, organizations or provide spaces that we can be invited to discuss this, structural barriers that exist for children, first generation children that are still there and that need to be removed. So we decided, like I said, to put our combined resources that we've been able through the investment of our immigrant clients in us and their trust in us and making us Layde and Parra the successful firm we are. We attribute that greatly to our immigrant clients trusting us with their case and their future, to be able to give back by removing some of those working on towards removing some of those structures that their kids face in order to be able to access higher education and be invited to these spaces without having to have a lot of gatekeepers. So that has certainly been our discussion. I had a lot of gatekeepers, and it really sucks. It's really a traumatic experience, and it really is difficult. And if you don't have the courage or angry enough to be invited in these spaces to break those barriers, you will give up. And I had a lot of people that I knew that gave up. And so I want to make sure that I make it as easily accessible to first generation students as possible, that they get to these spaces, get higher education, get access to that higher education. And it starts through the K through 12, and investing some resources there, as well as investing some resources in the future, as they're navigating higher education.
Right. Yeah. And I know that you've been quite involved with, education there and school closings and looking at equity, and been, pretty successful of that. For anyone who wants to learn more about that, you can, you can look up New Lit in Wisconsin and find out the work that Gabby is doing. And 2 weeks ago, we actually did a live stream too that you can find on my page. I think it was from, let me see here, what was the date from? I think it was the 14th that we did it. Actually, no, it was on June 13th. We also did a live that tells you more about some of what's going on there with school closures and how equity is playing into that. And yeah, and this education piece is huge, because I know as a first gen, it can be really daunting. And I share that passion around education. I know that I was doing some subbing for my son's dual immersion program, specifically because of language. And I, as a parent, I'm not an educator, but as a parent, I walked in and I could quickly point out the literacy, who was behind when it came to reading. And I noticed right away there was this literacy gap. And then I actually was in a meeting where I saw the data and it showed that the literacy for Hispanic kids were behind, which then, of course, I go down the crazy rabbit hole and find out that this is a nationwide, like a national issue, right? And, what's scary is that a lot of areas that have there's a growing population of Hispanics, and then a lot of the states that are being impacted are those that have lesser resources, and so this is really a huge issue. And in that conversation we talked about 2 weeks ago, we Grazia, who was also on, who has her PhD and has done a lot of work in this area, talks about how this is an issue for all of us, for the United States. Education is a human right, and the importance of education and what that implication is going to look like for our future. And so it's exciting to see. I know I've been working with both you, Kevin, and Gabby, on what's next, and it's exciting to see how you're going to be giving back to the community. And I know, Kevin, you've done some work already. Would you mind sharing a little about some of the work that you've done with, if I remember correctly, it was with undocumented students at the community college?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as Gabby said very well, immigration and education really are natural partners. I mean, immigration is like a dream of a better future, and I guess education is, and a right for your children is, many ways the same thing. So I think they're really a natural fit. And given Gabby's path to get here, and I guess in a way my path to get here as well, kind of really running through schools, and like Gabby said, through sort of like high schools, or in the types of challenges that existed for students, I think it really makes a lot of sense. And so it's something I've certainly been involved in throughout my career, trying to have some contact with schools, and particularly with young people. So our organization, we've done a lot of talks with high school students, for example, on immigration, both high school students who are from privileged backgrounds and students who are not, who are from kind of our client population as well. And something that I'm really excited about that we've been doing with our office is partnering with University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, which is I guess the second biggest college here in Wisconsin. It's really serves a large number of our clients and their clients' children in the area as well. It really tries to be dedicated to serving Latino and immigrant students. So I've been working with them for several years to provide like legal consultations for students to be able to kind of talk through some of the issues that maybe they or family members might be facing, things that could potentially be barriers, for example, to employment after they graduate, or things that, obviously just like the psychological stress of worrying about their parents or their siblings or things like that, to try to help give back to help students kind of work through some of those types of issues as well. And I'm hopefully going to be continuing to partner with them kind of as a project that I'm kind of focusing on to maybe do some more outreach and education, working with college students as well as high school students. So a little bit of involvement, not quite as intense or immediate as some of the stuff Gabby has been doing this last few months.
Well, there's all these different ways to kind of, I feel like the analogy that comes to mind is like, how do you eat an elephant? It's like one bite at a time, right? And so you're kind of taking different approaches, but taking one bite at a time, and kind of overcoming this big barrier for families. But you're right, it really is about having the opportunity to live a better dream, to have the opportunities, and education is certainly a pathway for that.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, a lot of the students that I talk to, it's like they have two issues. The issue is that it's like a feedback loop. Let's say you're an undocumented student who's going to be trying to get through a 4-year college. You're not getting any sort of financial assistance, right? And then you have to work super hard. You might take 6-7 years going part-time, working a ton, all this type of stuff. And then when you graduate, if you don't have a social security number, what are you going to do for the next? What value is your degree really if you're not able to work here? So it's like, a lot of these issues are so tightly enmeshed, and which is why I think it's great that we can kind of join from an immigration perspective.
Yeah. And I put if anyone wants to reach out to Kevin and Gabby, I put their website on here, and, you can reach out to either of them through there. Any last closing words, like, closing insights or, advice about how do you use your privilege for good and how to leverage that to make a difference before we close?
Yeah, I think like one of the big things that sometimes we have to do, and I had to do with, Kevin, have that conversation and be like, I am not being invited to these spaces as easily accessible as you are. I am, working as hard as you, but I'm just not being seen like yours are being seen. So I think for all, the Latinos out there, Latinas, people of color, sometimes we have to have that conversation with the people that have this privilege and the people that have certain positions that can make things happen, and be like, this is how I feel, this is what's going on. And I would appreciate, if we can work together where you can, maybe influence some of that privilege you have to uplift me. And that is a very tough conversation to have. And it was a very tough conversation or point for me to have with myself, that it doesn't matter how hard you work, and it doesn't matter your title, and it doesn't matter that your name is on a firm, that still people sometimes will see your color and see that maybe, you might not be a good fit because of like your color, your background, you might be too outspoken and things like that. So I would encourage everyone that is, especially in Wisconsin, where we're still navigating a lot of predominantly white spaces, just going to the attorney bar, like, and events that our Wisconsin bar puts out, it's all white people. And for us, I have to prepare for those mentally, prepare for those spaces. And sometimes I am not showing up authentically because it's exhausting to show up authentically. So then I'm exhausted because I feel like a fake, because I show up as a fake, right? So I think it's important that we need to start having these conversations with our managers, our, support system, and be like, hey, this is what's going on. This is where I want to be. I want to be invited to these spaces. You have access to these spaces. If you're a true ally, please give you some of that privilege, so that I can be seen and invited to those spaces. So that would be my last comments for.
Yeah, and that's like huge on the relationship piece too, because when you have a really trusted relationship with someone, you have a respected relationship with someone, it's like, even though it's still uncomfortable, you can lean into that and feel okay about it. And I know, sometimes we don't get invited, And I always tell people like, hey, if there's not the space, you create it. That's why like we do these like live streams too, right? Because you might not be invited to spaces, but what is great about, social media is that you can make the space for yourself so you don't always have to be invited. And I know Gabby and Kevin are both looking forward to doing a lot more speaking engagements too. So I'm just going to give a little plug in for them. If you are looking to talk about, equity, privilege, education, access to education, how to remove barriers, both are really invested in supporting the community in this path. Any last words for you, Kevin?
I think Gabby said it better than I could.
So, well, I want to thank you both for your time today, for sharing this story of Layde and Parra, for, sharing how, in all of this, I'm just hearing like the value of relationships, right? The value of relationships, not just with others, but also with yourself. Like Kevin, a lot of what you were talking about is, knowing the relationship with yourself and how, looking at, how you can use your privilege, and realizing that privilege comes in all shapes and sizes. And so, you can use it, even as a Latina, you have, like you said, you have privilege as an attorney. So, thank you so much. And again, if you have questions, if you need a speaker, Hispanic Heritage Month is coming up. Allyship and sponsorship is something that we should be talking about all the time. So reach out to Kevin and Gabby, and you can learn, more about what they're doing in the terms of immigration, but also their contributions and the legacy they're building towards education. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you very much, Ruby.
Bye-bye.
All right. I don't know if we're still.